Hi, my name's Pete and I'm the vicar at St Peter's in Aylesbury, and this is Harper. Harper's a little bit upset today because she had her hair cut earlier on today and she's feeling a little bit out of sorts. She doesn't like the change and it feels a bit odd. Harper likes routine, as many of us do. It's a biological fact of life, isn't it, that all living things grow and or change, and that includes us as God's church. I want to talk to you today about culture and values within our church lives. And not everything I talk to you about, not the examples I give, will necessarily be applicable to your church context. So please do try to think about the underlying principles and whether you could apply those principles in your context. When my wife Ali and I arrived at St Peter's about just over 6 years ago, we found 8 or 9 lovely old ladies worshipping there and one elderly gentleman. And 2 retired priests were coming into church each week to lead a 45-minute Eucharist, and then they would go home and the big doors would shut for another week. And most people in the community thought that the church was closed permanently, and the deanery had actually started to talk about how they might close it. To all intents and purposes, it was a club. Most of the old ladies that went to church there didn't live on the estate. I've got lots of wonderful stories of those first few months of being there, which I wish I had time to tell you about. But moving forward a few years later, our church family is now fully representative of our estate context. And that context includes markers of deprivation in health and well-being, education and skills, and poverty affecting seniors and children. And that means that most people coming to church with us are living with that deprivation and poverty. There's addictions, there's ongoing and historical abuse, mental health difficulties, complex relationship breakdowns, alcoholism, and just about everything in between. About 80% of our church family have no previous experience or culture of being church. There are low levels of literacy, so there's virtually no Bible knowledge. And very excitingly, we're now growing new worshipping communities, all at different stages of life and growth, different stages of becoming church, along with breakfast church, which is what we do on a Sunday morning. So an example of that would be Revelation Fitness, which is a fitness class that meets during the week where people come and they are hearing the gospel and praying together. Or our community garden, where people gather to follow Jesus and garden and grow vegetables for the community together. Or Play and Grow, our toddler group, which had its first baptism last October. Despite our best intentions, the changes that we desire to make in our churches often don't last, or at best they become a terrible struggle because of all sorts of existing prevailing cultures, some of which are often unspoken or very hard to recognise. And they start to take over or creep back in. In order to combat this, we need to be really clear about our vision and our purpose and our values. For example, as I sat down with those lovely old ladies at St Peter's in the first 3 months I was there, I asked them a vision-shaped question. What would you like things to be like in 2, 3 or 5 or 10 years' time? And gradually they started to tell me about how they wanted the church to be at the centre of the community, about seeing families engaging with church again, and to see life growing and changing. And so together we acknowledge that because all living things grow and change, if that's what they desired to see, then we were going to have to make changes. After all, if we kept doing things the same, we'd get the same results. And to expect otherwise, if we keep doing things the same and expect different results, well, that's Einstein's definition of madness. At the heart of that was understanding that the choices we'd be making might not be choices that we would make for ourselves. For example, the way things looked, like the seating, for example, or the songs that we sing, or even the things that we might choose to do or talk about. Perhaps the biggest change was to their mindset or their understanding of themselves as a church for the benefit of those who are not yet here. Perhaps you've heard that phrase before. In fact, I might even change that to for the benefit of those who might never be here, to exist as church for our whole community, regardless of whether or not they come into the building. And that requires a missional mindset. And the other alternative, the opposite of that, really is just being a club. And I'm not sure that a club was what Jesus had in mind for his church, particularly in Luke 11, verse 3, where Jesus says, Go, I am sending you. And then the disciples, well, they gather back together regularly, don't they, around the table. They gather around the table to worship, to share stories of their encounters, and to encourage one another. Somewhere over the last few decades or even centuries, it feels like we've replaced the word go with come. I love that poem called The Coming by R.S. Thomas that finishes with the Son saying, "Let me go there, to be amongst the people. The mess, the uncertainty and uncomfortableness is an incarnational way of being." For the people of St. Peter's, well, that was the start of a change in culture, from an attractional model of church where we expect everyone to come to us, to an incarnational one where we go to and are embedded and amidst our community like Jesus is. From a come to a go mindset. So how do we grow a missional culture that starts in and around our churches? And how do we keep it? How do we keep it from going backwards? Well, there are lots of things that I could say here, but one of the most helpful things, I think, is to be clear about your vision, about your purpose, and about your values. Now, I confess that those three words, vision, purpose, values, are words that used to be a complete turn-off to me until I understood how helpful they could be in establishing culture. I wonder if your church know what your vision, your purpose, and your values are. Our vision is what things will look like. Establishing vision requires us to paint pictures of how things will be. As it happens, our St. Peter's vision is not for our church per se, but for God's kingdom to grow in our community. It's based around Isaiah 65 that describes a place that's poised between heaven and earth, a place that is not so heavenly or otherworldly that it's out of touch, a place not so down to earth that it's recognizable or achievable even. In fact, it's not achievable without the presence of God and the presence of God's Holy Spirit. Your kingdom come on earth as in heaven. And then our purpose, well, our purpose is to bring wholeness and hope to the people around us through encountering Jesus. Again, how many of you are able to recite your church's purpose or mission statement, as we sometimes call it? I prefer the word purpose because it seems easier. With some certainty, I could say every member of our church family can recite our purpose. We say it every week at all of our worshiping communities. Purpose is important because as churches, there are so many things we could do. But if it doesn't fit our purpose, we don't do it. And that keeps us focused on track so that we're all headed in the same direction. And lastly, let's look at values. Values are like the stick of rock. When you cut that stick of rock open, you should be able to see the words running through that stick of rock, no matter where you cut it open. And our values are the same. We should be able to see our values running through everything that we do. Our values are how we do things. And when we practice our values, we see that culture gradually begins to change. So here are our 3 key values and a description of one way in which each value affects our underlying culture. Our first value is adventure awaits. It's about being a community, a church family that are willing to take risks. And taking risks obviously means failing sometimes, quite often in fact. And we see that in our culture through people's willingness and adaptation to change itself. That elderly gentleman I referred to earlier, his name's Pete. And Pete once said to me, I've been religious all my life. He said, but now, he said, I have a faith. And then he went on to say, I love coming to church these days because I can't wait to find out what Pete and Ali have changed this week. The reason that I think Pete is okay with change, well, I think it's because he understands and has bought into our purpose and our vision. That's why he's comfortable with the need for change, even in his later years. Our second value is creating community. And I think that we see this in our culture of welcome and hospitality. As churches, we all like to think that we are really welcoming, but the truth is we're not quite as welcoming often as we like to think we are. And the reason for that is because we have underlying cultures that prevail that are very subtle and difficult for us to see. We like to look deeply into how things look and feel. So for example, at St. Peter's, and this might be something that you do in your church, a really simple thing, we ask some of our welcome team to be outside, no matter what the weather. They stand outside so that they welcome people before they even get to the church doors. And I love the story of how our welcome team used to say hello and get into conversation with one lady who walked past the church every Sunday on her way to do her food shopping for about 2 years before she eventually came in and had some breakfast with us. Our Sunday mornings include a good, healthy breakfast as part of creating community, a healthy breakfast for hungry people. And the abundance of that breakfast mirrors the hospitality of God. And the people's physical hunger mirrors our own spiritual hunger. Another thing we try to do to create community is to let people lead. Our curate, Vicky, is just so good at drawing people from the community, regardless of whether they come to church or not, into leading. So in our Play and Grow team, our parent toddler group, the team is made up of people from the community. And nevertheless, our values for that group stay the same. We are still a group trying to follow Jesus, who pray and worship together. Our third value is pursuing the presence. And I think we see this in our culture of sharing stories, which is a little bit different from sharing testimony. When we share stories, people often share stories of things that are really hard and difficult, places where they're struggling to see God. And we try to ask this question, where do you see God working through that particular thing? We try to help people share their stories in lots of different ways, in different times and different places. And by allowing that to happen, we're engaging in corporate theological reflection. David Hayward writes in his book, A Learning Church, this fantastic paragraph. The church only becomes a learning organisation capable of adaptation and change in response to challenging circumstances by engaging in a shared process of theological reflection. Not only does this enable it to recognise the hidden assumptions shaping its life, it does so by calling on the wisdom of all of its members committed enough to join the process of shared reflection, rather than that of only a few. And it is this process of shared life through prayerful corporate reflection that enables the church to grow in unity and maturity, sharing the same mind, having the same love, being in full accord and of one mind. Philippians 2, verse 2. So by sharing stories, we're committing to pursue God's presence in the mundane, the ordinary, and the difficulties of our lives. And that becomes part of our culture, the way we do things around here. It's so difficult to change church culture without strong values that get talked about often, as values establish how we do things around here. Our values set the temperature for how we do things. So try your best to incorporate them into meetings, talks, preaching, notices, PCC meetings, and everywhere else too. I hope this has been helpful. It's been really good to spend a little time with you. Thanks for letting me share our story.